Hey, apparently I'm the Fonz now. Welcome to another Grain and Grape live brewing demonstration thing. My name is Joel, and today we're going to be talking all about dry hopping. Why do people dry hop? How and when do you dry hop? How many hops do you use? What is hop creep? I know these are some questions that I have. Thankfully, we are very lucky to have Helen here with us to answer some of those questions. So dry hopping, pretty easy, right?
That's no, Joel, it's not easy. There's the utilisation of hops in our hot side, cold side, how it interacts with yeast, temperature, the chemical compounds. It's still an emerging science. And we're not going to try and tackle the emerging science, but today we're going to cover off just some high-level basics about how to get the most out of your dry hopping routine.
Cool. So yeah, a lot more to it than perhaps one might have initially thought, sounding like. It's,
well, I'm surprised I've been able to make a decent hoppy beer, given what I've learned researching this topic.
All right, awesome. Well, it sounds like we'll be able to learn some new stuff. Speaking of which, if you're new to the channel, a little bit about us. Grain and Grape is a home brewing shop located in Yarraville, Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, the world. Our motto is we are here to help you brew a better beer, and we do that via making videos and uploading content like this. If that sounds like it might be at all interesting to you, please consider subscribing. That way you'll never miss a thing whenever we upload something new. Okay, I think I've about covered my end of things.
Okay, well, let's get started.
I'll get out the way.
Yep.
She'll do her thing.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm not actually doing a brew. This is just purely me having a chat about dry hopping, learning a little bit about hops and how we should treat them, when we should use them, and the issues that we might have with them. As I said, despite how much we know, hops, it's still an emerging science around all the compounds and how they interact, and it's an absolutely fascinating topic that we could probably spend days on. But I'm not a scientist and can't speak to all the technical stuff that is really at the heart of hops. They're extremely complex plants. So what is a hop? I actually think of them as cones of deliciousness, and their scientific name is Humulus lupulus. It sort of sounds more like a werewolf, but it actually is referring to hops. And this, I point to Exhibit A. I have a picture of a hop. Unfortunately, I don't have a beautiful fresh hop cone. We missed that opportunity because our hop harvest ended in March. But you can see that it's made up of a number of different plants. There's a lot of parts. There's a lot of green vegetative material. But what we're actually really interested when it comes to brewing is the lupulin glands, which contains all the resins and essential oils. So it's if you've ever grown hops, it's an absolutely phenomenal plant to grow. I know people who actually grow it as an ornamental plant because it's a great, during summer, it's a great shade plant. It's really hardy, it's easy to grow, it's very water hungry. but it is absolutely stunning if you've got a plant that's a couple of years old and they grow they can grow 30 to 50 centimetres a day at their peak growing season. They're a lot of fun to grow. So I recommend, if you've got the space, if you've got the height, grow some, and you're in the right climate, definitely grow some hops. But what do hops actually do for our beer? They've got antibacterial properties and they help to keep our beer fresh. They contribute bitterness, flavour, aroma. We all would have heard the history behind IPAs or India Pale Ales, where they were heavily hopped so that the beer would still be drinkable on its journey from England to India. Are all hops equal? No, there are so many different varieties of hops, and they're grown all over the world, and they vary from harvest to harvest. It depends on your variety, your breeding, the weather, the location, what point the hops were harvested, how they're processed, how they're aged, how they're stored, how they're handled. And it's a little bit, I suppose, when you're thinking about hops, it's a little bit like wine, is that from year to year, the grapes, depending on many of the factors I've just mentioned, you will get very different characteristics coming out your wine. And hops are no different. From year to year, you will get variation. And any of us who've had a little bit of a love-in with an Australian hop called Galaxy will know that there has definitely been some variation from, from year to year. When the first year I started using them back in, I don't know, it was 2012 or 2013, they were really pungent with passion fruit. Other years, it's been not so much, and it just comes down to the amount of rain. What's happening in the soil. Have they planted out a new field? If you're growing, oh dear, what is the? Is it Amarillo? I might have this wrong, but there's a particular hop that's actually grown in Germany and in the US, and they get same hop and completely different characteristics.
Yep.
So I don't know if you as home brewers have found this, but from year to year, the hops change, the acids change. And Joel, have you had any experience with this yourself as a home brewer?
I have grown hops myself rather unsuccessfully. So my experience is that I've learned I'm rubbish at it. Well, no, that's because in my case I've grown it in a pot, and growing hops in a pot is a bit restrictive, and they don't really like it, although they will tolerate it. But yeah, no, just completely on what you were saying there is what I have come to learn over the last few years, is that hops, in a lot of ways, behave like grapes, you could say.
Yes, exactly.
And I guess like what the French call the terroir. I don't know, sorry if I'm butchering that pronunciation. I know I'm butchering. Anyone who can speak French will correct me on that. But yeah, that notion that the environment that the hops are grown in, the soil, the sun, everything influences the character, and it varies from year to year. And as you're saying, apparently it works with hops too. So yeah, it's pretty amazing to think of it that way.
Now, if anyone thinks they've got a little bit of an addiction to hops, and I admit it, I will put my hand up. And during our COVID lockdown, I discovered that yes, I am actually addicted to hoppy beers. I can ignore the stouts and the sours and the saisons, but
excuse me while I turn the fog. I was going to turn the foghorn off. That's. Yeah.
We should have sorted this out before we started. Yes, I crave hoppy beers, but hops are related to cannabis, and I don't think that possible the addiction part of why people love hops has been fully explored from an addictive
Oh, you think
perspective.
there might be some kind of
I don't know, but
dopamine.
I do crave hoppy beers. Many professional breweries actually have access to their own crops and their own lots, and that makes it very difficult from a home brewing perspective to try and actually clone a recipe, because we're not getting that pick of the crop. We're not even getting, we're sort of, I think, way down the line, because large breweries and small breweries actually have orders direct with the hop growers, and those orders are always fulfilled first when the harvest is completed. And I do have a little bit of a story just about a beer that I fell in love with in the States, which was Bell's Two-Hearted Ale, and I might have mentioned this in a demo before, but I tried very hard to actually brew a clone of this beer, and it's 100% Centennial.
Ah, cool.
And I absolutely love Centennial.
Yeah, Centennial.
But
awesome.
the only way to sort of even start to replicate it was to actually dry hop with some Cascade, which of course Bell's aren't actually doing, but they have their own in-house yeast, and they also they have their own specific Centennial hops that they source every year. And it depends on when the hops are even harvested. So Amarillo, for an example, depending on if it's harvested early, mid-season or late, you will actually get some different characteristics coming out of the hop. So they're extremely complex plants, and what we see here is that we actually we only grow female. There's no male plants. We can't actually breed as individuals. We don't breed hops. So it's, or did I get that the wrong way?
No, I'm not sure. Yeah.
But we can't. There's no. There's hop breeders breed hops, but us as home brewers really don't have access to anything like that. Also, home brewers don't have access to proprietary hops. They're just not available to home brewers.
Sort of like a copyright thing, or an embargo.
So I didn't do any research around that aspect for this talk. But something like Galaxy, you can't just go. You can't get a Galaxy plant.
You can't grow your own. Yeah,
no,
I know. Amarillo, certain things, Simcoe. Yeah.
You do have some hops available as home brewers to grow. That some of these hops are actually have been bred from. So in Victoria, we have a hop called Victoria, which is available to home brewers, so that they can, and that's a beautiful hop. But the hops that we mainly use are the hop pellets, and when the hop pellets are being produced, it's a mix of different parts of a harvest, and to try and provide a consistent product each year, but you are going to get variations from year to year. So what forms are available to the home brewer? Mainly we have wet hop cones if you're growing your own hops, or you can actually buy them direct from hop growers, but they're only available, it's very seasonal, once a year. In Australia it's usually around March, and at this time of year you will see that there's a lot of wet hop beers have actually come into the commercial brewers have actually released a lot of fresh hop beers into the market. The fresh hops bring a real depth, resinous depth to a beer, but they're extremely volatile, and after many years of sampling commercial products and also doing experiments with our home brewing, is that it's a product with a short window of time to be drinking at its best. But for home brewers in Australia, we've missed that's now, opportunity has now gone. The other option is dry whole cones, and I have an example here of this was, I just grabbed a pack from my freezer. So, is to dry your to dry your cones, and you dry them very quickly. Otherwise, they start to oxidise very, very fast. So you need to dry them quickly once they're harvested. And this package with a vacuum seal, flattened so that it actually stores well, and being flushed out. And if we actually just open this, it should sort of oh dear. Why is there never a good pair of scissors anywhere? But what we end up with is that they still smell really. So this was 2018. They went straight into the freezer after being packaged. They've been stored, they've been dried correctly, they've been stored correctly, and these could be, they're ready to be, they can still be used, even though they're 2018. And they smell good. The other option for home brewers, and actually there's a lot of homebrew shops do sell whole cones, whole dry cones as well. Our shop sells whole dry cones, do we?
We do, certain varieties. Galaxy is probably the most easily one to get. Again, it depends on what we can get year to year, but Galaxy is usually the one I find that we stock.
So this type of arrangement, if you want some Galaxy, grain grape have some, but the most common hops available to home brewers in Australia at the moment is pellets, and you can see that these have been well packaged, foil, vacuum sealed, no air. If these are properly stored, they will last for years. We'll just open them up and take a little bit of a look. So I've grabbed a pack of Goldings, and we're all familiar with these, but
hold them out. I'll try and I'll get as close as I can. Yeah, so they're little rabbit pellet food things.
It smells absolutely delightful. Very. Actually, I didn't grab an example of that. Very, very good stuff. They're good product from year to year. It's been around pellet's been around for quite a while. They usually actually know what the alpha acids are because they do vary from year to year. There are oils and extracts available. So there's sort of emerging technologies about getting all of the good stuff out of the hops, and so there's oils, there's extracts, and this is sort of emerging. These types of things aren't that. I don't think they're available to home brewers in Australia, or they're not as common as and easily to get as the pellets. You also have one of the new innovations, which is readily available, is cryo hops. And cryo hops is essentially creating a powder where all the vegetative material is actually, I'm not saying all of it, but it's mainly removed. So it's actually like a concentrated product. It can come in pellets, it can come in powder, and we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later on. But it's still just even the delivery of hops to brewers is something that there's a lot of innovation, and I suppose it's watch this space. What we'll be using in 5 years' time? Who knows? Something
new. Actually, we do have a question. Sorry to interrupt you. That's come through.
Please. If you have questions, ask them. We'll attempt to answer them. If we can't answer them, we'll go away and have a think about them. Or if we can't get it, manage it during the session, then we'll post it in the comments afterwards.
Yes, absolutely. I forgot to mention that in the intro. So use the chat box. I don't know if I'm pointing in the right direction. The thing messes up all the lefts and rights. But yeah, use the chat, the live chat if you have any questions. And of course, if you're watching this later on down the track, use the comments section, pop a question down there by all means, and we'll do our best to answer that later down in the future. So Josh is asking, just going back to your packaged hops there, that the cones.
Yep.
He's asking, what's the shelf life for the vacuum sealed hops, and do they need to be kept in the freezer?
Well, that is a great question, and
I guess that's probably you're going to get to that, were you?
I was going to get to that. So
Hang
if
in
we
there,
just
Josh.
if we just continue on.
Continue on.
So hops are very expensive, and very expensive in small quantities. So this pack that I just randomly ripped open and just tossed hops around, it's 40 grams. And when you buy them in small amounts like this, it actually works out to be very expensive. So the larger the quantity, the cheaper it gets. But that can be actually really hard for a home brewer to do, depending on the sort of brewing that they do. You might have nowhere to even store anything. So it can be the most expensive part of a hoppy beer. And there's a particular beer that I'm in love with, and I'm not going to mention the beer, so anyone who knows me might know it. No, I have some idea of the actual recipe. I can't afford to make the beer. It's cheaper for me to buy a professionally made beer than for me to actually make it as a home brewer. And I think I'll try it one day just to see if I can sort of replicate it, but it's just not worth it. It's going to cost me too much in hops. Yeah. How do you actually minimise the cost of the hops if you're making a hoppy beer? Buy in bulk, which we've just said. And you can do this personally, but if you're part of a homebrew club, that's often something that they'll be doing, or if your club is not doing that, then it's something you should be discussing about bulk buying ingredients to cut down on cost. If you've got a group of people who get together, you've got some friends in your area and you homebrew, is also looking at spreading the cost around, and that's a really good way to minimise the cost of the hops. I live in a house where both my husband and I brew, and we like to brew hoppy beers, so that it's a no-brainer for us to buy hops by the kilo. But the question about hop storage. So this is my dry hop hint number one.
Let me get that. We've got to get our
and we're doing old school here. No PowerPoint presentations for us. So let's see if I can make this work. Okay. So store hops correctly. Hops will actually last a very long time if stored correctly. Invest in a really good vacuum sealer, not just a little. I've seen there's some really sort of little dinky ones out there. This actually is an ingredient that costs. It's actually costly, and we need to treat it right. So invest in a vacuum sealer. When you're prepping your, this is just a hint for brewers. When you're prepping your hot side hops, and you're measuring them all out, do your dry hops at the same time and vacuum seal them so they're ready to go whenever you actually do your dry hopping. You've got the hops out. It means that you don't have to double handle your hops if you're using the same hops, hot side and cold side. And that just saves you a little bit of time further down the track, because you just grab your hops and they're ready to go for dry hopping. Keep your hops in the fridge or freezer. If you're storing long term, actually, we've done both. At home we do both. We store in the fridge and the freezer. When we've done the harvest and we've ended up with a lot of packs like this, we don't know when we're going to actually be using them, so we'll actually put them straight into the freezer, and they keep well for years.
Right.
These were flushed out. The packet was already flushed out with CO2 when we put this in, so it is still smelling amazing after all these years. Oops. Excuse me. But when you open a bag of hops, they should smell amazing. If they don't smell good, I know this is a hard one if you're brewing and you need the hops. If they don't smell good, don't use them, because that's going to impact the flavour of your beer. And I have to learn by experience. I've done it, I've regretted it, I've ruined a beer. When I open these hops, and sorry, I'm just going to keep just sniffing them as we talk, they smell just so vibrant and beautiful, and you know that they've been treated well at every point along the process. But how old is too old? So I've said a few times now that they keep well. If you store them well, they'll keep well. And there's, I don't know if anyone's, and I mentioned this, I think, every demonstration, Brewlosophy, Google them. This is a group of individuals who experiment. They ask questions and then they will do the experiment. So usually any question that you might think of in home brewing, they've tested. So they'll do 2 batches, compare them side by side, then do blind triangular tastings and give their perceptions of what they've actually done. So how old is too old? Google it. They've actually done a brew using old hops and newer hops to see if there was any perceivable difference between using older and newer hops. If they haven't been stored right, then they're not going to last. So I don't know the actual answer of how long is too long. I did actually sit on some Galaxy for a number of years, and I never had a problem with them, but they were stored well. Every time they were, I stored them in small amounts. They were vacuum sealed, and I think I actually stored them in the fridge, and they were perfectly fine. Others may have a different experience, and if you've got something to share with us, please do. So I hope that answers the question that actually came in. It's a sort of maybe, but store them well, and they will last.
So there you go, Josh. I hope, and everyone else watching, that answers the question. So it's a little bit like how long is a ball of string, but as long as they're stored properly, you get a long time out of them. Sounds like a lot longer than I would have thought. Years ago when I used to listen to podcasts, I'd say maybe 12 months was probably the max you'd get.
Fresh is best.
Fresh is best generally, right?
If you look on, if you start looking around for particular hops and you go on to different homebrew shop websites, if the hop that you need is not available from grain and grape, and you go looking somewhere else, you'll find that often when they talk about the harvest, so this harvest here is 2020, but sometimes you're seeing, the harvest is actually a few years old. I don't know what that actually indicates of, and you hope that the shop has actually stored them well. So we've spoken about hops, where they sort of come from, the cost, how we might actually store them. But why do we dry hop? We use hops on the hot side, and I suppose it's to increase. And we are focusing, sorry, just to be clear here, we are focusing on beers where you really do want some hop character coming out of it, which is why you're dry hopping. So we dry hop because we want to increase the aroma and flavour without adding bitterness. Now that sounds like a really good idea, but it's not quite true. And we're sort of starting to touch on the emerging science behind knowing what hops do at what point in the process, and understanding the compounds and the interactions that they have with the various elements of our brew. So let's talk about IBU. Now, International Bittering Units, developed many years ago. It's a measure of the isomerized, I probably said that incorrectly, alpha acids that are present in the finished beer. But it's not a perfect measurement. Because we know a little bit more these days. And it's always thought that the bitterness came from the the isomerization of the alpha acids in the boil. So you needed a certain temperature to get any bitterness out of the beer. And if we look at the traditional way of brewing beer, you're adding bittering hops. It's a common term. You see it in most of recipes that that are out there available, and you'd be adding that. You've got the notion of doing first wort hops, so adding around 76 degrees before you bring the wort to the boil. If your boil's 90 minutes, you might be doing 90, 30, 15, 10-minute additions, and you might have traditionally done a few additions right at the at flame out. And because of the requirement for heat, it was thought that no bitterness actually comes from cold side hopping. Not quite true. So let me see if I can really scramble up some words here. And I have had to actually put a note of them. Stuff.
I'm not laughing.
Yeah, don't. Polyphenols and humulinones and
Humulones?
yes.
Is that it?
What Joel said. Sorry for
Humulinones.
butchering the words. I knew that I should have practiced a lot more saying them out loud instead of just reading them. They impact on hop bitterness with no heat required, and this is sort of from what I've read, I still think that there's a lot of work to be done around understanding what's really happening. But that's not the only thing that actually contributes cold side bitterness. So everyone's taste and sensory experience is a little bit different. We perceive all flavours differently, or maybe not, but our perceived bitterness increases with increased hop aroma, especially in beers with moderate to high IBUs. So our perception is actually also coming into play. So we've got that, what's happening between what we taste and what we actually smell. pH increases with dry hopping, which may increase the perception of bitterness. Old hops, so back to old hops, old hops that are oxidised, they also contribute bitterness. So this is trying to, I suppose, just condense this into a very brief overview of this, is that dry hopping contributes IBUs. We cannot measure it because none of our calculators have any ability to be able to do it. Know that it's actually happening. There's a little bit of a rule of thumb around if you have calculated your hot side IBUs, is that if the calculated IBU is under 20 and you're dry hopping, the beer can become more bitter with dry hopping. If it's IBU is over 30, the beer can become less bitter with dry hopping.
Huh.
It's a fascinating concept, and I think it really goes against everything that us as home brewers have learnt. Maybe if you're coming in new to home brewing, you're not as indoctrinated in how we used to do things, but it's something to just be aware of, and to also to understand that yes, some of the, depending on the hop form that we use, that can also have differences. Different impacts on our IBUs as well. So, which leads us to dry hop hint number 2, which is dry hopping can contribute bitterness to your beer. I've glossed over so much in that discussion, and I will point you to some very good sources of information towards the end, or I might even just do it as we're going along. But just in regards to coming back to hops themselves, is that you should keep good notes about
Recipes? Yes.
Because the ingredients vary from year to year. Understanding that if there's things that you can't measure, then keeping a record of them means that you actually build up an experience, and you can use that experience to determine what you're going to do the next brew. If you're just relying on some numbers that have come out of Beer Smith or Beer Farm or whatever software you use, or then I think you need to dial up that record keeping to understand that there's a bigger picture, and it may not be evident in just the numbers that you're getting back from plugging your recipe in. So keep the records, and this will help you to dial in your future brews. So, what hops should we use for dry hopping? That's, I think Joel said, how long is a piece of string earlier. Yeah. This is how long is a piece of string. It really depends on the style. We all are having a little bit of a love-in with, many homebrewers are having a love-in with hazy beers and NEPAs, and they tend to call for those New World.
We're going to have a noise disruption coming through. Just bear with us. Okay, no, as you were.
New World hops that are coming out of America, but as you see, there's constantly new hops being released to the market, and anytime you pick up a brew magazine or you go, we'll just wait for the. Anytime you pick up a brew magazine, you'll see ads for new hops that are being released to the market. There'll be articles about new hops. You'll pick up recipes, and there'll be a hop that you've never heard of. Hops to bring a hop to market can take a very long time. What does a long time mean? Maybe a decade. From the time when it's first bred, and it might be one of thousands and thousands of variations, and so then they have to grow it season after season, and how's it going to perform what's the harvest going to be like? So there's all these things that they have to work out. Is it actually going to consistently provide a good flavour? So when you see a new hop coming to the market, it's not just it's new, but it's actually, it's not a new sensation as such. It's been a long time in the works to actually get there, and we've seen a few of them come out over in the last decade. There's been a lot of them hit the market. Some I love and some I don't. There was one that's just released recently, Eclipse.
Okay.
So used it in a beer. I don't know if we used it right, so that's another. There's so many hops out, so new hops. How are they going to interact with your current, the hops that you're currently using? These are things that I suppose the older hops, you have a little bit of certainty. So talking about Centennial, Cascade, we know that Centennial and Cascade work really well together. I use a lot of Mosaic. I like Mosaic, Galaxy, and Eldorado. I think that they've got a really, they interact really well.
Complementary sort of, yeah.
So Joel, what is your favourite hop combination?
I'm a fan of Amarillo. Amarillo and Simcoe go really well. That's a classic though, isn't it? It's probably a bit of a cliche. And then you just throw in like a C hop, maybe Cascade, or Centennial is probably one of my favourite hops. You were talking about that before. So yeah, that's a good combo. I haven't, I get stuck in my ways. I've got to try maybe some of the newer variations that you were talking about and see what combinations work well there.
I think that's a really good point, Joel, is that we do get stuck in our ways, and you know what, there's nothing wrong with that. If it's working for you and you like the beer that you're brewing, keep doing what you're doing. Some of us are keen to experiment. then or sometimes you regret it because you end up with a lot of beer that you don't actually
That
really like, and it's not as good as your old faithful recipe. I've got an IPA recipe I tinkered around with for batch after batch after batch, and I drifted one way and then I came back, and I drifted another way and I came back, and then I found that I'd actually found that recipe. For me, I had a sweet spot, and so then I just stopped brewing it because I was done. I perfected it.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, sure.
But it's a very good beer, and it was sort of recently replicated in our house by my husband brewed it, and I was reminded of how good it really was. Don't tell him I brewed it better. But coming back to what hop should we use? It's going to be dependent on the style, and you really want some complementary flavours. And you want those complementary flavours being between what you're doing on the hot side and what you're doing on the cold side. You need to be very careful when you're mixing your hops and the percentage of the hops that you're actually using. So coming back to my IPA recipe, I tinkered with the same hops, but I used different amounts of them, and you sort of you're just tinkering around the edges until you actually get it. You get it where you like it, and to keep in mind, it has to be brew beer that you like drinking. You don't have to please everyone; just please yourself.
Yeah, that's yep.
When you're looking at hops to use in dry hopping, focus on. Oh, actually, I just was reminded I did forget dry hop tip number 3 is keep good records.
Yes.
You should focus on dual or aroma hops because they are high acid hops have less aroma oils, so you need more. So it's not that you can't get flavour, dry hop flavour from any hop. It's how much do you have to use, what's actually going to happen when you use a lot of them. So there's information out there I'll just touch on this. There's a lot of tools out there to help you with understanding the flavours that come in your hops and understanding hops. Now we do have a book in the shop here called The Hops List. Now, this is also available. They have a great website, and you can go online and you can see the bittering hops, aroma hops, dual hops, and they'll tell you everything you need to know about that particular hop. It will give you the styles that certain hops actually work well in. Lets you know what hops, if I can't find that weird obscure hop that has come up in a recipe from somewhere overseas, often there's an alternative hop that you can actually use that will do just as well. So these are really good sources of information when you're trying to learn about the characteristics of the hops and what they're actually going to bring to the beer. There's online hop flavour wheels, which are very helpful in understanding the flavours of your hops. I use one on our website called Beer Maverick. He's got a lot of tools. I think it's a he, it might be a she. Beer Maverick has a lot of tools available that are just there. Easy to use, and there's a great hop comparison wheel where you can actually overlay 3 different hop varieties and see what the flavour profiles are, and that's a really good guide to understand, if you're looking for complementary flavours, to visualise what a certain hop combination is actually going to bring to your beer. But there are no hard and fast rules here. It's about finding, finding the hops that and flavours that you like. I would suggest that you experiment, and this is really good when you're part of a homebrew club, to do smash beers and just try single hops. so you get a really good idea of what that hop is actually bringing to the beer.
And a smash beer, for those who maybe not heard the term before,
single malt and hop single hop.
Single hop.
Yeah.
And a single hop. Yeah.
Yes.
SMASH.
Yeah.
Yes. Good.
This can be sometimes a little bit limiting because some hops really shine when they're actually used with other hops, and it's a little bit, I suppose it's a little bit unfair to some hops that they can be quite one-dimensional when used alone, but they can actually be a really great supporting hop for other hops to shine from. Another great idea to do, and this is something that any home brewer can do, is to do small batches, or to take a batch, and if you've got some gallon or 4 litre carboys, split your batch and try some different hop combinations. There's another method. It's a little bit dodgy, but if you've got a beer that you don't think is actually hoppy enough, put some hops in a French press and see what that actually, and put the beer in. It'll be a bit flat, but that's another way to see, to get an idea of what a hop might bring to an existing beer that you're already brewing.
Without having to do it for a whole 19 litre batch.
And I've never done this, but if you grab a really weak flavoured, generic, sort of lagery type American beer, and pop the top and put a couple of bullets in, and see what the flavour actually, what it brings to it. So that's another way to experiment. There's also, if you have hops available, often it's, if you get them, these are actually quite hard pellets, but taking a different, some combinations of hops, crushing them up, and having a sniff as to what you're actually sniffing, and because that's going to be a really good indication of what you might get out of your beer when you dry hop with those hops. So there's no hard and fast rules with the hops to use for dry hopping. There's very much a science where it's the science behind hops is phenomenal. So it's more science about how all the flavours actually interact. But if you're happy with what you're doing, keep doing it. If you get the opportunity to try other people's home brews, or if you're part of a homebrew club or a group, it's a really good idea to be able to leverage off, I suppose, a little bit of a hive mind. But everyone's got very different tastes and perceptions, and so yeah, if you like what you're doing, keep doing it. But there's no hard and fast rules. Just try and keep them complementary, and you shouldn't go too far wrong. That brings me to dry hop hint number 4. Use complementary flavours.
Okay. And maybe there's an opportunity here too. I did write this in the chat, but if anyone has any tips for their favourite combinations, let us know in the chat or the comments.
Yep, that'd be great. Now we're going to just take a short 5-minute break, and we'll be back soon.
Cool. All right.
Well, welcome back. Today we've been talking about dry hopping. We actually haven't talked about dry hopping too much. We've spoken about hops, buying hops, harvesting hops, storing hops, and what hops we should use during dry hopping. Now, one thing to just call out here, it's having a discussion about dry hopping. It's very hard not to have a discussion about what you're doing on the hot side. So your hopping regime for your boil, and of course that's another area of where things are changing. So I'll just do a quick touch on that. Is that and I did touch on it earlier. We spoke about that, you know, when you using hops on the hot side, you traditionally would do, you know, maybe first wort hopping. You would start, you know, adding your additions. Your bittering additions would be, you know, from the start of a boil, throughout the boil, and you might throw in some aroma hops at the end of the boil. Increasingly, our knowledge of what's actually happening during this process is changing, and I think that it will continue to change in how we actually utilise our hops on the hot side. If you have a recipe that's calling for bittering additions, a lot of bittering additions, and doesn't seem to sort of gel well with what we now know about, you know, doing things more at the flame out, not just at flame out, actually when the temperature has dropped, you know, down to 80 degrees, even 75 degrees. So a lot of the recipes that we're looking at don't seem to sort of support our current knowledge, and it's a call out that there is a lot of information out there that is just out of date. So when you're looking at the cold side, we just had a little bit of a talk about the sort of hops that you might use on the cold side, and I mentioned that you should use complementary hops on the hot side. You will get a much more harmonious beer. It doesn't mean that you can't push the envelope and try some different things. Recipe design is another topic, and we're not going to cover it off here today. So I'll just keep it brief. Is that the science, our understanding of what we're doing hot side is changing. Those large bittering additions are falling away in more recent recipes. You do have, you know, when you're looking at the hazies and the NEPAs that are extremely popular, and their popularity has not waned in the last couple of years. In fact, it is increased, it's so, you know, and they're not to everyone's taste, but this is the sort of beers that people want to brew. Well, when you're looking at those large bittering additions, you just don't need them for this style of beer. You're actually getting all the bitterness you need actually from primarily hops that flame out, or when the wort is cooled down, and also during your you're getting bitterness that coming from your dry hopping regime as well. It makes recipe development a little bit difficult, but I think it's another session that we might do. It's
a whole other topic. Right?
Do one day is to just do a recipe design session. So that's all I'm going to say about hot side hops for a moment. But when we talk about dry hopping, when should we do it, and for how long should we do it? Now, again, this is where we've got a lot of information out there, and the more we know, the more some of the stuff that we do has actually been working perfectly well. And if you're getting good results from your dry hopping routine, keep doing what you're doing, because this is. When I was doing research for this presentation today, there's still, we're dealing with, I suppose, emerging science, and we're also dealing with people's sensory perceptions as well.
Okay,
and you can read that one brewer is pro doing this, and another brewer is going, doesn't work for me. It's like, well, how can that be?
Very subjective, yeah.
It's very, very subjective, and it's a bit of a tough one. So when can you dry hop? You can dry hop at Heikrausen. So as soon as, activity starts, start dry hopping. Active fermentation, so, around that couple of days in, 3 to 4 days in, when it's still active. You can do it when, you can dry hop when your wort is hot, or when your wort is, sorry, I'll take that back. When your wort is, around that 18, 19, we are talking ales here, 18, 19, 20 degrees. Yes. So you can dry hop then. You can dry hop when it's cold. You can dry hop in, and we'll touch a little bit more on this, you can dry hop in secondary. You can dry hop in a keg. So these are all things that people do, and if anyone's tuning in today, you're probably doing one of those things when you're actually dry hopping your beers. It's a bit of a tough one. So on the cold. So we've already spoken about that you can actually get bitterness coming out of your dry hopping, and you can also. The length of time that you dry hop for is something which is coming under increasing scrutiny. So there's a lot of evidence to suggest that maximum extraction of all the flavours and aromas that you want from your hops is not happening in a couple of days, it's not happening in a week, it's happening in hours, 24 hours, it's happening that quickly. And if you use cryo hops, it happens really quickly because it actually stays in suspension. It's something where you just that utilization and when you do it, and if you do it, so we're going to touch on some of the problems that you actually get when you at the different stages of dry hopping. You have. So you can do it, you can do it when you're cold crushing. So you can do it at any point. But what the preferred method to minimise impact, oxygen impact on your beer, is to dry hop during active fermentation. It allows the yeast to metabolise any oxygen that's actually got in when you're trying to get it into the hops into your fermenting vessel, and provides us added side effect of biotransformation.
That's the buzzword at the moment.
It is a hot buzzword, and I struggled with this one a little bit because it's a little bit of a it's science.
It's a bit murky.
Yeah. So just to touch on biotransformation, it's the transformation of hop oils in the presence of active yeast. That's
the summary. So
that's the summary.
The yeast do some magic stuff to the
and
hops.
Yes, and some hops are sort of more suited to biotransformation than others, and I didn't take a note of what those hops are, but I will point you to information where you can find out more information about biotransformation and what hops what hops work better, and what's actually happening during that process.
I'll tuck some links in the description.
Yeah.
Eventually,
yeah. So, so if you have been dry hopping at, during active fermentation, you've probably just been doing a really good thing for your beer. So, I didn't know it, but I have been dry hopping about day 3, day 4 for many years now. My beer's got an opening gravity of, 1060, 1070. I'm sort of wanting to hit it when it's around 102, 1025, 1023. That's when I'm actually putting my dry hops. I've usually just been doing one dry hop addition, so I'm not opening. I just have a plastic fermenter. I know that there's a lot of different funky types of fermenters out there at the moment, and there's different ways of actually fermenting, but I still just use a basic plastic fermenter with an airlock.
Yep.
And the opening of, it sounds so terrible. We're talking about dry hopping 101. Opening up the lid and throwing the hops in, which allows oxygen in. However, I've been escaping the issues around introducing oxygen because I've been doing active fermentation, which allows the yeast to actually clean up. Clean that up.
Do you use a bag when you chuck the hops in, or do you just chuck the hops in?
We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that.
Okay.
So, before we go any further, dry hop hint number 5 is you can do all sorts of things. Whatever's working for you, keep doing. But to minimise some of the issues that we have with introducing oxygen or other issues when we're dry hopping, is to dry hop during active fermentation. Because one of the, and this is another emerging science, I know I'm just repeating myself with the word science, is the term hop creep. And hop creep it happens when you're dry hopping, and this has actually happened in our house where there's been multiple dry hop additions. The beer's been given a diacetyl rest, and you pick up nothing funky in it, and when you sort of go to taste it, once it's been carbonated, you've got diacetyl. I was like, where'd that come from? That wasn't there originally. And basically, hops have enzymes that create fermentables that are similar to malt. Except that they're very much lower levels, causing possible re-fermentation in the fermenter of a bottle. So often if you have sometimes beers, if hop creep, it can reactivate fermentation, so the beer actually over attenuates and it finishes too low. So if that's been, I'm usually on the other side, is that they don't ferment out far enough. But if you've had a beer that's you're expecting it should be finishing around 1010, 1012, and it's heading south, you've probably had you've had some hop creep actually happen. Dry hopping at warmer temperatures can trigger enzyme activity leading to diacetyl. If the yeast and the nutrients have run out of warmth, then there's not enough energy to actually clean it up. So how do you avoid hop creep? I just really packed it. It's a big topic, and I packed it into a couple of bullet points. You can, so coming back to temperature around dry hopping, if you're not dry hopping at active fermentation, you can drop the temperature. Dropping the temperature down will alleviate the incidence of hop creep. You can do that, dial the temperature down to 15, or you can take it down to lager temperatures. It'll take a few more days if you're dry hopping, around that, 2 to 5 degrees. It will take a little bit longer to get extraction out of the hops at that lower temperature, but you minimise the, well, you're not going to get hop creep happening. Now that's an area that low temperature dry hopping, that's mentioned earlier, that's the point where there's a lot of contention around that. Some people think that, they're getting lots of flavour and aroma out of it, and some think that they're getting none. And some brewers will actually cold crash the beer, take the beer, remove the beer from that fermenter and move it to a secondary, and turn the temperature up to around 15, and then do their final dry hop, which I think is possibly overcomplicating the process. It's up to you. I know that a lot of home brewers love to tinker, love to experiment, and love to possibly overcomplicate it. I haven't said it today, but I have said it before. I'm an extremely lazy brewer, so I'm going to do as little as I can to get a great beer.
Sorry, I cut you off there. I was a serial racker for a while. Probably you and I were coming up in home brewing around the same time, and as you were saying, those old sort of not myths, but the advice that was floating around out there has changed, and it used to that you have to rack the beer off the
Well,
primary and secondary?
Well, the secondary, what's secondary fermentation? Because it comes up in a lot of recipes, you know, and it's the term secondary fermentation or move to secondary. It's like, what the hell does that mean?
Yeah.
It's because, like, I'm not doing a secondary fermentation. I'm not throwing other yeast at it. But what it actually is, it's a term used the practice of moving the beer. Basically, when the primary active fermentation is complete, it's moving the beer from all the trub and the rubbish that's actually sitting on the bottom of your fermenting vessel. It's moving that beer to a clean vessel to actually finish off. And the thought was that you actually get you know, you're removing the beer from volatiles and stuff that you've used, and you don't want impacting your beer. The problem with it is that you can introduce oxygen. It's another step.
Yep.
I've never found any discernible difference in quality because I have done it both ways, because everything is actually sunk down to the bottom, and it's quite, to me, it's quite inert. There's not much activity unless you get in there and you're actually shaking and agitating your fermenting vessel. It could be useful for yeast harvesting. So if you want to do your dry hop in the secondary, that allows you to actually harvest your yeast, which is actually still a valid, a valid reason why you would do it. I no longer do it. Joel, you no longer.
No, I stopped. Yeah.
And Joel, did you see any difference in the quality of your beer when you stopped doing it?
They stopped being horribly oxidised. I know that. So I was actually causing more problems than I was solving by doing it. Yeah. At best it does nothing. At worst you're actually introducing oxygen and staling the yeast. So yeah, I tend to recommend not to do it these days. Yep. And unless you get, you enjoy it, and
if it's working for you, keep doing it. And you might have done some experiments and found in your brewing setup that no, you get better results. I have a nice big fridge where I can cold crash, and that actually removes anything that's still in suspension that I don't really want, like all the yeast. That actually suspends it out. And just talking about the cold crashing, if you want to see the impact on what cold crashing does to your beer, take some beer from your fermenter before you cold crash it, or if you're not cold crashing, take some beer from your fermenter and put it in the fridge for a day and see what actually sinks out to the bottom. That's what's happening when you're cold crashing. You're getting rid of bits and pieces that you don't want to actually be drinking. Okay, I said that we weren't talking about recipe design, but it is helpful to have some idea around the types of quantities that you should use when you're actually dry hopping. And if you're looking at, these sorts of hops, so these hops and these hops, you can use weight for weight. So if you've got 30 grams of hops in your recipe, you can use 30 grams of this, or you can use 30 grams of that. You see a lot of 30, 60 grams in recipes because they've come out of the US, where they use imperial measurements. So 28, 30 grams is 1 ounce. Hence it's a very popular popular measurement of hops in recipes that you see. If you're using cryo hops, would suggest that you use about 15 grams. So use about half of what you'd be using for the hop pellets. If you're using whole wet cones, if you had 30 grams in your recipe, you'd be using about 150 grams to make that up. How many should you actually use? It depends on what you've done hot side, which I said we weren't going to talk about, then I talked about it, and I'm still not talking about it. But it really depends on what you've actually done and what you're, how much of the that late additions hops that you've actually done. So you want a little bit of balance between what you've done on the hot side and what you're going to do on the cold side, because ultimately I think you should be aiming for a balanced beer, a beer that actually is enjoyable to drink and not one where it's so undrinkable because you've added so many hops that it actually has hop burn down your throat, or it's got no bitterness at all, and it's just like drinking, you know, sort of a manky glass of orange juice. That's how I might have described some of the hazy and Nipah IPAs I've tasted in recent times. But a good rule of thumb for the amounts that you actually dry hop with is for pale ale around 5 grams a litre. For IPAs around 10 grams a litre. For dippers around 15 grams a litre. And if you're doing a crazy hazy Nipah thing, you might use up to 25 grams per litre. So that is actually my dry hop hint number 6 is just a guide. It's not a rule. It's just a guide as to what amounts of per litre hops you should actually be using on the cold side. Cryo hops, when you're using those, there's a lot of this is still quite a new product, and how it's actually being used, you don't necessarily always get the best results. The IBUs that come out of the cryo is a little less than what's coming out of pellets. So I'm actually even referring to the cold side. So a good rule of thumb is if you are going to be using cryo hops in your for dry hopping, only replace about 30 to 50% of your hop. Like if you're using pellets, only use 50% pellet, 50% cryo, and you'll get a much better result than if you're using 100% cryo. And a really sad fact of using hops in for dry hopping is that the less processed the product, the more liquid you will lose because the hops absorb it. So wet cones become very, very wet and they soak up a lot. These expand and will soak up a lot of the liquid. The pellets, we've all seen it. They suck up a lot. Cryo doesn't suck. Obviously, doesn't have that plant material, and is basically just hangs in suspension in the beer. So you don't have. That's one of the benefits of cryo, is that it is more concentrated, but you'll pay more for it, but you will keep more beer, which can only be a good thing. Now, we can't have any talk about dry hopping without having a talk about yeast. And if any of us have, now our focus here today is actually on ale strains of yeast. We're not talking about lager or quake, which is another topic altogether. But the yeast strains that we'd be actually using for our typical, pale ale IPA dipper. So things like, your yeast 1056 or US05. So those traditional, the yeast. So those traditional West Coast type yeast. They actually they finish quite dry, and they can actually strip a lot of the perception of hop character out of the beer. So yeast strains can actually accentuate the hop character of your beer. So US05, 1056, or any West Coast type of strain is definitely going to make your beer a little bit perceived as a little bit drier, and cleaner. And I probably, this is what I do. If I'm using those types of yeast, I actually dial up my dry hopping a bit to get a little bit more hop character in it. Anyone who's listened to me do any demo will know that I'm a big fan of Nottingham, an English ale yeast. I find it gives some very nice fruity character and actually supports the hop character of a beer really nicely. It also gives a little bit more of a bigger mouthfeel to the beer. What's really popular at the moment is all the New England London ale yeast, New England yeast, which are lots of stone fruit, lots of citrus. I've done some experimentation with the IPA I mentioned earlier that I use a lot of mosaic in. I've tried the recipe with USO5, with Nottingham, and with I think the Danstar New England yeast, which I can't remember the name of off the top of my head. And I actually love what the New England yeast actually brought to the beer. It just dialed up the fruity notes and the aromas. It was just absolutely phenomenal. I won't use it again for that beer because it just takes way. I've used it 3 times, and 3 times it's stalled at 1019 and then slowly makes its way down to 1012. I don't have weeks to wait for a beer to finish fermenting, and that might be how I'm actually using the temperatures that I'm using, and that I might have to do things a little differently if I was to use it again. I haven't gone exploring others' experience with that. So your yeast strain will definitely have an impact on the flavour or the end product of your beer. As we know from discussions around all sorts of other beer types, yeast is for a lot of styles, yeast is the absolute superstar, and you're just taking a basic wort, and yeast is what is transforming it into a Flanders Red or a Belgian Pale Ale. So have a play around with yeast strains. Use what you like. Coming back to the scenario of actually splitting, experimenting with dry hopping and splitting the beers into smaller vessels. Have a play around with yeast if you get the opportunity, or you've got the space to do it, because it can be really interesting to see exactly the same beer and what different yeast strains will actually do. We also can't go without talking about dry hopping and water chemistry. And we're fortunate here in Melbourne that we have fairly good water, and I don't do much with my water other than dechlorinate it. But what I did start doing, and this did work and lift my hoppy mosaic IPA, was actually adding some sulfates and chlorides to the water, and it definitely lifted. It just lifted the quality, lifted the perception of everything that was in the beer. It was just not excessively more, but it was just more. And there's harking back to Brewlosophy again, they've got some really good articles on the actual use of sulfates and chlorides in your brewing water. A good rule of thumb is a 1 to 3 ratio, but it depends on, I suppose, the individual and their perception. So you're looking at about 150 parts per million sulfate and 150 parts per million to 100 of chloride, and you're going to it will definitely dial up your beer. Joel, have you used brewing salts too, or actually what do you do with your water chemistry, if anything?
I use Brewer's Friend to calculate my water chemistry, and again, this is probably something I'm going to have to revisit and do some fresh research on, because who knows. But my knowledge comes from a few years back, and what you're talking about, 100 to 150 parts per million is usually what's recommended for IPAs and hoppy beers from memory. So that's sort of what I tend to aim for with my salts. Of course, the chloride, the old the sort of thought is that brings out the softness and the maltiness of the beer. And this is really
it actually brings out, so the use of these salts actually brings out perception of hoppiness, and
any salt,
and it also helps with increase, helping out the mouthfeel as well. But if you go too far, you start getting chalky, and everyone's got a little bit of a different
palate,
different palates, different sensory perceptions. So find something that works for you. If you don't do anything with your water and you're brewing a hoppy beer, that's one thing to actually get rid of the chlorine and to actually use some sulfate and chloride.
And the chloride, and that brings out the bitterness too. That's sort of the thought around
so
that
you don't want to. It's a little bit of that finding what ratio, what actually works for you. So I was using the 1 to 3, and that was actually fine for me.
Yeah.
So dry hop hint number 7. Water and yeast matter. So don't ignore them, and it could be that whatever you're doing, repeating myself again, is that you will, if you like what you're doing, you like the results, keep doing it. Now we've spoken a lot about the different aspects of hops, amounts, but how do we actually dry hop? It can be really simple, and that is if you're doing it during primary fermentation, or when it's fermenting, basically open your fermenter and chuck the hops in. You can put them in a bag, so you can bag them. You can put them in. There's devices that you can buy to use, like tea strainer type arrangements. It's what works for you. Many fermenters these days have hop ports, so you sort of not even having to open up the fermenter. The issue with in any method that actually confines the hops is that you're not exposing those hops to the maximum amount to the wort. So you really want to have as much exposure as you can. You want all your hops actually working for you, and if they're bundled up, they may not actually be getting the exposure that you want. If you want to, just throwing your hops in is easy. You don't have to do anything. If you don't, and it will give you, I think, the best results. Advantage of bagging hops is that it's easier for cleanup. I just think that I'm going to have to clean up anyway, so it doesn't matter. There's hop stockings. I personally use, I buy pantyhose and just cup them, soak them in some sanitizer before I use them, and that way I can just toss them out. I don't have to bother about even trying to clean a hop sock. That's a really good way to do it. If you're not doing it during your fermentation, there's other places you can do it. You can do it in the keg, and you can put it in a hop bag or a tea strainer, and that's a really good way. If you've actually done some dry hopping and you're not happy with what you've got, then you can actually throw some more hops at it. If you do throw hops into the keg, try to drink your beer within 2 to 4 weeks. It's not, you don't want those hops sitting on your beer. You want to, if you can't get them out, drink the beer as quickly as you possibly can. So that's okay, I suppose, if you're drinking a lot of beer or you've got a party, it's not going to matter too much. You could do things like, there's the notion of a randalizer, and I think there's other terms for it, but if you've ever walked into a bar and they've got some funky setup on the, where they've got hops in with beer, and so they're running beer from a keg across the hops to actually serve it. You can do this at home. We use a method where we actually use the filters, and we just basically will take just some whole cones, put them in the filter, run the keg beer through, and then serve it out the other side. And again, you don't want to actually be leaving the beer sitting on the hops for long, and you get some very different characters coming out of the beer. So if you've got a beer that's actually not that hoppy, that's another way to actually hop up a beer when you're actually serving it. But whatever method you use, minimise the exposure of oxygen. It is just not good for the beer.
Do you find, we just had a question, and this is actually something that I often wonder myself, no matter what you do, and how hoppy your beer is, there's a certain reality to after a few weeks the hop character does just drop off. Am I jumping ahead again? Am I doing?
No, you're not. We're actually we're reaching the basically the it is coming up because
okay.
But what? Okay. Okay. This is hop enemy number 1 is oxygen.
Yeah. Here we go. Black Thistle. This will be for you.
It's. So we've touched on a few things that can happen when you're dry hopping, and I might have mentioned oxygen. Oxygen is not good for your hops just right now. Them sitting out, that's not good. This is not good. Old hops are actually quite oxidized, and that's not good. Poor storage of your hops. Now we're going to cross over into a few things here as well. So it's not only just poor storage of your hops; it's poor storage of your beer. If anyone out there watching this is into very hoppy, hop-forward beers, whether it be West Coast, even hoppy pale ales or dippers, triples, neepers, whatever it is, that notion of actually the supply chain being cold the entire way along, and you go, why would that matter? If you take it to extreme, you don't want to buy a beer that's been sitting on a dock at 40 degrees in the sun, or probably even hotter. The storage has a real massive impact on beers, and the issue with hops is that they're extremely volatile. So coming back to science, people, hops is all about the science, and hops are really volatile. So I mentioned earlier talking about fresh, using fresh whole cones in the beer. That is the pinnacle of a volatile beer. The hops, everything in it is just so, it's just changing, and it can change, from day to day. So that they don't last long. So if you see, I'm going to make a call. If you see a harvest ale sitting out there, and you're in Australia, and it's somewhere later in the year, you probably don't want to be buying it. It will depend on the style. We've got a brewery down on the Mornington Peninsula. They do a fresh hop ESB each year. Good beer, and it's got enough of a malt base that losing the hop character initially is okay. But if you're putting fresh hops into a beer that should be drunk fresh, if it was brewed with another form of hop, you need to be drinking it when it's really fresh.
Right.
So age of beer is not good for hops. The way we store beer is not good for hops. All beers will lose their hop character over time, some faster than others, and this comes down to a little bit of the alchemy of getting the hops into a beer. So that recipe design, that interaction with all the chemical compounds. Some breweries are doing it accidentally. I think some have really just nailed it, and you'll see some breweries will. There's a couple that stand out from UK and also the US, where their beers are just superb, and the hop character is retained. Canning has definitely helped most breweries with their hoppy beers. That process, definitely you do see that hop character remains longer in a canned beer than a bottled beer. And I didn't actually explore that part of why that is, but I'd be happier to buy a 6-month-old IPA in a can. Not so happy to buy a 6-month-old IPA in a bottle, because it just seems to have. I think also what you've got is you've got a little bit of headspace in a. You've got the headspace in a bottle, and you have no headspace in a can. Which could be it. So, talking about oxygen, you just don't want your beer exposed to it. nor light, nor extreme temperatures. And you know, it's a little bit scary if you walked into a bottle shop and you see that there's dust on a beer. At home, it can be really difficult. I'd suggest that because we, you know, just the nature of our setups is if you brew a hoppy beer, don't age it. If possible, keep it cold stored. You will get a, it will definitely last longer if it's cold stored, even if it's keg cold stored or bottle. I know some people have canning machines, but yeah, whatever your storage method for your beer is, cold store it. So I don't know whether, did I fully answer that question? Or
yeah, I mean, it does. I've always attributed it to oxygen, and again, as home brewers, it's sort of really hard to avoid 100%. I'm yet to experiment with the new fermenters that are out there. You know, the pressure rated fermenters.
And
so
brewing
maybe
under pressure, and then you're transferring. You know, there's no oxygen
really
transfer.
Doing oxygen-free transfers, and whether that might yield appreciable differences.
At any point in your processes, if you can minimise or eliminate exposure to oxygen, that is going to be a good thing for your beer, and your beer, the hoppiness in your beer will last longer. If you can cold store your beer, the hoppiness in your beer will last longer. If you have managed to, you know, not make any of the mistakes along the way, your beer will stay. Those characters will stay for much longer. So, you know, I know that we talk about fresh ingredients, but I suppose it's about good. You know, hops can be about them, not necessarily that they're fresh, but they smell good and they've been stored really well. There's also another. There's another enemy which I did call out a little bit, and that is don't. Enemies of this topic is enemies of hops and impact. The enemies of hops. Don't use too many. There's just nothing. There's nothing worse than a beer that is just hard to drink because you don't have the balance right. And I know that you know, some people are happy to. They love a beer that I would see as being unbalanced. But I suppose when you look at a beer, you ask yourself, do you want to drink would you just drink this one beer? Could you drink a lot of this beer? Could you drink a lot of this beer a lot of the time? Or do you actually want to drain pour it? I don't want to brew beer that I would go that actually I want to be able to drink a lot of it because I'll have a lot of it. But these are questions to ask. So I think restraint in some cases is better. You know, when we're talking about you know, NEPAs up to 25 grams a litre dry hopping, for me that's really hard to drink, really hard. And there's a couple of local Melbourne breweries that have definitely pushed the envelope there, and you know, well,
not going to shame anyone.
Well, it's a sort of discussion you don't want in a bar because people start arguing how great it is, and it's like I can barely choke it down. It's not that great. I'm just going to touch on something which does come up from time to time, and that's the scaling up and down of recipes. And the hop, you know, do you actually need to change? You know, you're not just, you know, multiplying and dividing to come up with a new hop number. It doesn't really matter so much in a homebrew scenario. You do need to take it into consideration when you're scaling up or down from going from a homebrew recipe and scaling it up to a commercial. Even, you know, if you're going from doing, you know, 50 litres to, you know, maybe 200, that's when you might start wanting to have a think about it. But if you're scaling up or you're scaling down large going from a commercial down to homebrew level or vice versa, that's when you're not just doing a simple, multiply and divide with the volume. You do need to look a little bit more into it. Larger operations will actually get different utilisation out of a hop, so you're going to be getting some different characters. So you just need to be aware if you're actually doing that, because I know that some homebrew clubs actually have really big brewing vessels, and they're basing, so that's just something to just keep in mind if you're taking a small recipe, because you will have an impact on your hopping regime.
Is that why there's a shift at the moment towards grams per litre? Is it easier to scale?
I think there's probably
does that apply?
That actually may be. I actually don't know. Oh. It might be a reason to do that. Maybe that grams per litre has always been around, or maybe to be really to be very clear, our obsession with hops has escalated in the last 5, 6, 7 years, and it's been a very steady increase. And we're now at the point of talking about 25 grams per litre.
Right.
And if anyone has done that type of beer, it's a lot of hops.
Yeah.
It's an actual lot of hops.
It's a metric butt ton of hops, I think.
Yes, that's the correct technical term. So it's that. So I think that there's just a change in how we present data and how we talk about the beers and how we dry hop, and we're moving away from that traditional recipe design into something a little bit different.
And it's just incrementally, exponentially. It feels like
I really do hope we've reached that point of where we can't dry hop it. Don't do over 25 grams per litre dry hop.
Yeah, why not with no beer? It'll just be
it's going to suck up all your beer. We've talked about that, hopping of ales like pale ales and dippers and triples and neepers and hazies, but you can dry hop anything. It really depends on the beer and what you're going to achieve. If you look at a lot of American beers have Americanized English styles. The primary difference is that they're hopped more and they're dry hopped. What's the difference between an American barley wine and an English barley wine? There's an American porter, an American red. These are all actually where you're hopping in a beer that you wouldn't actually traditionally do. I do a New Zealand Pilsner, and I do actually very little hot side, but 40 grams of Orca, absolutely delicious. Makes a very, very delicious Pilsner. So lagers, Pilsners, I love a hoppy lager, very, very enjoyable. Saisons, I like to dry. I'm a bit of a fan of a passion fruit saison that I make. So not only do I throw in some passion fruit puree, I also I do some dry hopping with mosaic, because I find that the flavours are actually really quite complementary to it. I think Galaxy would also work in that instance. I'm not talking that it's excessive dry hopping, but I'd throw in at going back to when's the best time to actually dry hop. So active fermentation, I'll throw in 40 grams at that point.
Saisons, okay, cool.
Stouts, porters, they're all they can all be hopped. It really depends on what you're trying to achieve, but you will definitely see, if you're scanning through any beer magazine or brewing classic styles, you'll see that Americanization of traditional styles, and it tends to be around actually getting more hops into the beer, which I'm not necessarily. An American barley wine, I much prefer to age an English barley wine than American. I'll drink an American barley wine because the hops, coming back to the hops will start to drop away. So then what are you left with?
You wind up with.
So this is the
You wind up with an English barley wine, is what you wind up with.
Well,
isn't
you probably
it,
it's not. They
Eventually.
They don't tend to. My experience and my perception, my opinion,
Go for
they
it.
don't. American barley wines just never end up being as good as what
As
an
good,
English
yeah,
barley wine
okay.
is. But there are definitely there are exceptions to that. But yeah, I'm a little bit. I'm a fan of English barley wines.
We all have ours.
So this is we're just reaching the end of our chat for today, talking about all things dry hopping. I know it's been this is a topic where on any single one of these aspects you could deep dive, and it's complicated. It's really complicated. As I said to Joel before we started the presentation, I'm surprised I've ever brewed a decent IPA. I think I've just done it by sheer luck, not without understanding the ingredients. And you think you understand the ingredients, but I think there's a lot more to know. So I think that the hints. This presentation will be sliced and diced a little bit. I think the hints are, those key things to keep in mind when you're thinking about dry hopping. That it's your beer is actually, it's not one element. It is it's a holistic ingredients and processes, and if we can get all these right, and we can treat the beer right, we end up with something amazing at the end. Now, some of the information that I've used to research this topic, and it's a mind-blowing topic, so I'm going to fangirl a little bit on Scott Janish. I read his the new IPA Scientific Guide to Hop Aroma and Flavour from end to end. I recommend this book. If you want to know more about hops, read this book. He does. I describe him as probably a citizen scientist, and he's done all the research for you, and presented in something that's actually quite easy to read, even though a lot of it is just going to maybe fly over your head. But some really great information. If you don't want to commit to a book, just go to his website. He or sign up for his. He sends out an email with a blog post periodically. So about 2 weeks ago, he sent sent out an email with dry hopping as the topic. So he's. He basically, he's got peer review of the information that he's releasing, and just a glance at any of his articles, and it is mind blowing the amount of information that's there, and also I suppose what we don't know. You've got magazines, so BYO magazine. I'm going to make a call out here. They actually. On one of their articles say, we have a collection of over 300 articles on dry hopping. How recent are they? Just be mindful that our knowledge of what's in hops and how we use them continues to grow, and any information that's out there could actually be out of date. So just be very mindful. If you look at you go looking around for word, bitterness, and hand on heart is that there is no bitterness comes from dry hopping, and science is indicating that that's not the case. So just beware of reading out of date information. I've mentioned this a few times throughout the talk. Brewlosophy. If you have a beery question and wondering about, if I use these age hops, what's going to happen? they will have an article about it. They would have done the experimentation. They look at it from a number of different angles. It's a really, really good source of information, or a good starting point. You know, when you're considering, you know, adding salts to your water, or you know, what's the impact of using cryo as you know, compared to pellets, malts, whatever it is, different yeasts. They will have an article about it. Take a look at the hop list. So there's a great book out there, but they do have a website, and that's a really, really good source of hop information. Got some really good lists of hops, and yeah, a good place to go to get an understanding of what's you know, what is primarily in each hop. Look at flavour wheels when you're trying to come up with those combos of flavours that you think might work. You're going to see that you want complementary flavours. It would be great to hear of people who've really, you know, just pushed the envelope, and I've used, you know, these two poles apart hops, and they've actually worked. I'm certain that you know, that there's lots of examples of that out there. As a home brewer, I suppose I try to keep it a little bit simple, and do things that I know are going to work, or you know, I've looked at a flavour wheel, or I've looked at the characteristics, and then decided, you know, even what ratio of that hop I'm going to use with the other hops I'm planning on using. Homebrew Club. If you're not a member, it's great to, yeah, they're a great place to have support. For people to try your beer and give feedback, to brew, you know, to buy in bulk, you know, hang out with like-minded people who like brewing beer. They're really, really good, and there's a lot of phenomenal home brewers in Australia. Some of the beer out there is absolutely amazing, and you may only ever get access to it if you join a homebrew club. Homebrew stores, like Grain and Grape here in Yarraville. We're online, have a YouTube channel. There's everyone who works here has great knowledge of end-to-end processes. So if you have questions, it's a really good place to start. Grain and Grape also have fresh wort kits, so they've actually brewed the wort for you, and they'll give you suggestions on what dry hopping and what amounts you should actually be adding. Online, there's a lot of information. Be skeptical. Don't believe everything you read. You will see opinions where that don't actually agree, yet hand on heart that's someone's experience and they're sticking by it. That's just the nature of who we are as humans. Yeah, and humans, and it doesn't matter what the science says. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing because that's you know, it works. It works for me. If it works for you, keep doing it. So that's all. That's all I've got for today. I hope that you might have got a little piece of information or something from it. Yeah, if you've got questions, feel free to contact the store. Or put them in the comments, and someone will actually answer them. But I'd suggest keep an open mind, experiment. Less can be more, and have fun dry hopping, and yeah, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Cheers.
Yeah. Thanks everyone, some really good information there. I'm sure you all learned something. So yeah, check the description below. Helen will send some links to me and I will pop them in there. And keep an eye on our schedule for upcoming streams. You'll find that on our website. Again, link will be in the description below. So thank you for watching, and thanks Helen, great job.
Cheers.
See you everyone.
Bye.